Okay, this is Patty Sheriff, and I am interviewing Richard Barron, who is the Director of Elections and Registration in Fulton County, and Stan Matarazzo, who is on the Board of Elections in Fulton County. So, first thing I wanted to ask about is what do you see, or what is your mandate in your positions? You first, Stan, being on the board.
The mandate for me, I'm the vice chair now, and this is my, what am I talking about, 7 years, I think it's total, or maybe this is 8, is that all the people that in Fulton County that are eligible to vote and eligible to register can be properly registered and have the easiest path, whether it's early voting, absentee voting, or live on election day, to be able to cast their ballot.
For me, it's making voting easy and convenient. You know, making sure that we have enough polling places, that we have early voting available, that the process is smooth for the voters. And
Have you found that people use early voting as much as they could?
My experience in Georgia has been that we need to get the numbers up. But in the 2014 general election, we had almost 89,000 people vote early. But
Out of a total of how many?
But I believe that was about 30% of the registered voters. Now, I'd like to see it above 50, approaching 60 to 70%. And that's doable in my experience.
And the time that they had, I know they used to have like a month, and now it's down to about 12 days prior.
19 days.
It used to be 45 days.
Yeah.
Okay, and that was basically a major mistake by the state legislature to make it that long. And the reason is because the registration doesn't close until 30 days. So you got this floating registration list that you're working with in the first 15 days of the 45 days, or even a few after that, before you get everything registered. It was a nightmare. And now, at least the registration is fixed before you open the early voting.
I think also that the longer the period, the more complacency is bred. I mean,
Yeah, they tend to vote at the end of the early
because
voting.
you will see, for example, in Texas, where you can get 70% of the voters voting early, they do it in 12 days. And they'll have 70% turnout during early voting. And here we have 19, and we're, the most we've had since I've been here is in the 30% range.
Do you think it's because people don't know about early voting, or how do you inform the public about where to vote and when to vote?
We're spending a lot more money on advertising, especially on the radio now. We were relying on print media, and I'm unsure that it was having the effect it needed. We're also trying to get candidates to push it more, and elected officials, trying to get it out to the neighborhood planning units in Atlanta and all the public information officers in the municipalities. It will help the election day process if we have fewer people voting on election day and more voting early. Those poll workers on election or during early voting almost become professional poll workers, because they're doing it day in and day out for 19 days, and then they come back and do it again and again over the year.
Okay.
There is a legislative problem with it, in my opinion, with the early voting, and that is the way the state legislature introduced the first legislation on early voting. they made it a subset of absentee balloting.
Uh-huh.
And they designed the sign-in system similar to the lengthy testament that you have to make for absentee balloting, instead of the simple little voter certificate form you use on the day of voting.
Yeah.
And that, if there are ever any backlogs in early voting, it's because of that process. If they would just simplify it and make it a subset of election day, when you actually do in-person voting, everything would speed up.
Huh.
And I've mentioned it to the people at the Secretary of State's office a couple different times over the last few years. And I haven't seen anything come out of the hopper.
How is your relationship with the Secretary of State office?
It's actually improved dramatically. I think Rick is a big part of that because he's so effective at running the largest voter registration in the state and having minimal problems with that compared to smaller entities that have bigger problems. Of course, we had the biggest problems of all before he arrived, so by comparison, that's also good. But I think he's handled the relationship with the Secretary of State's office in an excellent manner, and I think they actually look to us for, to some degree, for innovation now.
I was going to ask you about the most recent problem that this postcard. Mm-hmm. It started out with, people don't realize precincts change, and then they go to vote, and it's not where they thought it was going to be. And it's first of all, who redesigns the precincts? That's your job, right? Is that, and the Secretary
The
of
polling
State.
place changes?
No, the
or
actual precinct.
who draws the lines?
Yeah.
That's done at the legislative level is where all the districts and everything are drawn. So our office doesn't have anything to do with that, but what we do have control over is changing polling locations. We're the ones that move the polling locations, but we only move them when construction moves us out, or the rent goes way up, or we don't have parking, or the school no longer has any room for us, or the ADA requirements are unmet there.
Mm-hmm.
So we don't initiate those things.
No.
They all we get the effect of the change, and then we have to enforce it somehow. Come up
Right.
with an alternative.
Right.
And
So, is there a lot of people in this last election that were moved? What would you say, how many people were moved?
Well, we had 81 polling place changes in the probably 14 months leading up to the March 1st primary, or presidential preference primary.
81, that's a lot.
It's a lot. Was less than the highest over the last 10 years, but it's more than average.
So then to inform people, this postcard, it comes from the state rather than locally.
We order them.
Yeah.
The state produces them.
So they're designed at the state level.
Yes.
And then there was a big problem with the design because they were actually being delivered to the polling place.
Yeah.
You brought one as an example.
Yeah, and the post office indicated in a meeting that they think there's a design issue.
Yeah.
So
And they were never consulted before this, or it became apparent after? the
My
postcards were
guess
sent?
is no, and there's going to be a lot of legal. I think there's going to be some bureaucracy and legal matters that have to be resolved before this can be redesigned. And
You personally asked them, right, to redesign it? Because, see, let's explain what the problem was again, is that there's 3 addresses on this.
correct.
One is for who you are, one is where you used to vote, and then where you're supposed to vote. So when the 3 addresses are read by the machines or the
actually,
person?
what it does is one of them is
Did I pick that up?
the precinct name. It's the precinct name and polling place.
Uh-huh.
The second one is the the city precinct name. So it's identical. So they have the same polling place address on here twice.
Uh-huh.
Then,
Just the new one, right? Or is it?
yeah, and they're both. Yeah, the only address on there is the new one. So, but they
Oh,
put
I
it on
see.
there twice because they have a municipal one.
Yeah.
And it's in our county, it's always the same. And then below is the voter's address.
So the
but it's-
machine reads the second address is where to send it, and they're sending it to the polling place.
sometimes, yeah. And
Because I remember being in the meeting last month, and they said, well, Ralph Jones, who works with you guys, said that one polling place gave him 750.
yeah, and I think that number's
postcards and-
reached over 800 now at
800.
one location.
At one location. So multiply that times 81 changes or whatever.
Most of the locations that that contacted us, I mean, and then we ended up calling all of those locations.
Yeah.
Most of them received in the 20 to 50 range.
So
But that's still a significant number.
Yeah.
If you have, 1,000 voters in the precinct and 50 of the cards end up at the polling location, that's a number of voters. I mean, that's a pretty good percentage of voters that didn't receive their card. Now, if you add also, we get a lot of these back, and they, it says return to sender insufficient address. But if we check the addresses, they're fine.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
So it's the machine reading it wrong?
We don't know. I mean, we didn't get the best explanation, I guess, at the
Post office.
post office, and they're mailed first class.
And who
You know,
pays the postage?
the county.
The county. And what is your postage bill for something like that?
Well, we pay 39 cents per card, and we sent out about 250,000, and about 60,000 of those were returned to us.
Wow.
And of
About
the
100 grand.
60,000, about 40,000 of them we know are good addresses. So then,
And they don't give us our money back either.
no, no. So those are good addresses, and
So you have a new burden when all these things come back. Two things: you have to see if they're real addresses, and so it actually puts somebody into the gray area where you're questioned whether you really live where you live, and you have to run that down. And could you conceivably be dropped from the rolls?
well, what we do is we mail out a confirmation notice after we get it back for that address. So we end up spending additional postage. But what we're going to do now is on May 11th, we're going to send out a head of household mailing every house in Fulton County that has a registered voter.
That's coming from the county. now.
That's going to come from us, and
And
that's
you
going
get
to
to
be paid.
design that postcard.
Yes, we're going to put it actually into an envelope. It's just going to say official election mail. It's going to have your polling location, and then on the back it'll have all of the early voting locations. So that's going to cost about $170,000 because we want to make sure that everyone before this election knows where to go to vote, that they're also informed about early voting, and then from here we will we'll always do a head of household mailing in addition to the precinct cards, so we don't have this problem again because
Right, because
from
it
what we know-
exposes you to legal problems.
Well, and we know that there are other counties. We've talked to other counties offline, and they have the same issues we do. It's not unique to Fulton.
The election board meets every month on the second Thursday down at the county seat, right?
Yeah.
130 Peach
130
Street.
Peach Street.
Anyone can come.
All right.
And you mentioned that you pointed out to the state and asked them to change the design, but they said it would cost too much money, which kind of boggles my mind because anyone that does graphics knows you just go in there and
Yeah.
zip some things around and it's done, you know?
Well,
so do you
I think for them there are some legal issues that go into the design, and I'm not a party to what they are.
So
But-
how much of a pushback are you making with them about their design?
Well, I think the AJC has done some articles, and they know our concerns. We met with them, and then we also we have good communication with the Secretary of State's office. Chris Harvey, the director, he knows what the problems that we had with the precinct cards, and
He's the state election director.
he's the director of elections for the state, and I think a couple of the other counties have been in touch with him, so he's aware of this and he's responsive, and I think that also we invited them to our meeting with the Postal Service, and they sent 2 of their higher representatives to that, and I think the Postal Service offered a mail design analyst to help them. Now, we don't think that they're going to be able to design new cards this year.
I don't see why. I mean, it seems like a simple thing to me, but to have that happen, what would you have to do? Sue the state?
I don't know. It's probably something for another discussion.
I have heard the same thing Rick is indicating, that there's some legal issues. It must be in the statute somewhere about the design of the card or the content of the card. And until they get that worked out, they probably can't. I mean, like you say, I don't think it would take 2 days to get the card redesigned, design graphics and everything. But
it makes me
but there's
wonder
gotta be
what the
something.
intent is at the state level,
I don't think there's any malintent or anything along those lines. I think it's just that what's happened, it's like there was a perfect storm for this election. We had, I don't know how many polling place changes some of the other counties had, but we had so many that, and the turnout was so high, that 25% number of returns that we get had a major impact on a lot of voters. So there was, it was a lot of confusion, and we started hearing about it 2 days before the election, because we knew from a conversation with the city of Atlanta that the council president, Caesar Mitchell, had been at a meeting, and 20 people had said, "Hey, I didn't get a precinct card for my change." And then, so what we did was we put 2 people at this location, so that when somebody drove up, that they could direct them to their new site right away. But we didn't know we didn't realize that it was going out everywhere, because what happens is when we get those cards back, we do an audit to make sure all those precincts are in there, but we can't audit every single card. They don't come back in precinct order.
Yeah, that's another thing that I think is a glitch, because, we live in the electronic computer age, and they don't give you the postcards by zip code. They give them to you by the registration number.
You'd think it would be by precinct, because that's the way you're dealing with it.
Yeah, I mean, why not? I mean, it seems to me these days a 10-year-old could figure out how to program that.
And I think we probably, the contractor that they use probably, could do that. But they produce them in voter registration number rather than precinct number. So there's no way for us to say, this looks like 2,000 for this precinct. And
well, you mean first they find everybody in Fulton County, and then they print them out by registration number, or by the whole state?
But what we do is we order them by precinct number.
Yeah.
We order all by the precinct, but then when they come back, they're in registration number. So if we order 20 precincts, we don't get them grouped in precincts. We get them just from the lowest registration number to the highest, and without regard to the precinct.
So that puts a burden on you, because, don't you have to sort them before you give them to the post office?
What we do is we audit them to make sure that we can find that there are at least 1 or 2 of every precinct in the order.
But they didn't forget a whole precinct.
And then we also look to make sure that they're all in the same direction. So
to face the machine.
Yeah, so that they go through the machine correctly.
Right.
And then we take them, once we get them from the state, we drop them at the Postal Service. Crown Road, and
Yeah.
um,
It just doesn't seem like the situation's been remedied at the state level at all. But your head of household workaround sounds like a good idea.
Yeah, and using I think using the candidates too that he's going to use. The candidates should be the most interested parties,
yeah, and I know like
and making sure that they know the changes in their voting precincts, so they can communicate out. It was another way to get the attention of the voter. I mean, for them, it's actually a bonus.
And I saw Commissioner Darnell has promoted the early voting sites already. I saw.
Let's talk about that lawsuit that, you know, came off a big lawsuit from the 2008-2012 elections. And, well, Stan, how did you feel seeing your name on a lawsuit?
Not real good. Not the first time I've ever been sued in my life, but business issues at times.
Well, was there ever any personal liability in question, or?
They have a blanket coverage thing for the board, so it wasn't like I was going to lose my net worth over this thing. But it's just embarrassing that we did so poorly. It was that whole thing. I don't want to reevaluate everything that happened, but part of the problem, and I'll probably get some feedback on this, being it's a little controversial. Part of the problem that led to who was running the department goes back to a director that we had who was doing a pretty good job, and he made some missteps in his management style. That's all I'll say about that. And the board had adopted a plan to transition him out, and he understood that he had to go because of the circumstances. And without any consultation whatsoever, the commissioners fired him, leaving us with 0 at the top and no plan of transition. And the sequence of events that happened from that point until we finally hired Rick is all a result of that decision by the Board of Commissioners. I will stand by that. It's because we had worked out about a 6-month transition, which would have allowed us to find the right person. Might have been him, actually.
It wasn't like some of the main issue was that you weren't processing registrations. Some 40,000.
Yeah, the 2012, the actual lawsuit was about it was about poor management, but it was about
actually 50,000.
It was,
but not all from your county.
We didn't have the registrations in the express bowls. They weren't in there, and so we had all these provisional ballots that had to be cast. And I mean, it was 10,000, I think it was some huge number, and some of that had to do with the Secretary of State's movement of new registrations to us at a very late date as we approached Election Day. But a lot of it was our own fault.
How so?
Poor management. I mean, not putting the resources in the right places for processing the data. But
so
again,
you don't think it had anything to do with targeting certain groups who were, I mean, because I know there were some massive voter drives going on, this New Georgia and Acorn and different groups over the years with registration drives, that I know Secretary Kemp had actually made some kind of statements that came out in the hearings.
yeah.
That that he didn't like seeing these new registration drives. That it was going to affect, the outcomes.
I don't think there was anything that was mishandled with that. I mean, the problems that existed with the New Georgia voter drive was related to incomplete registration information, or unsigned, or signed by the same person. You could tell for in 10
forgery.
Or 15. Yeah, I mean it was.
Well, actually, I saw the statistics, and it was like 25 out of was it 50,000 that were actual forgeries like you're talking about.
But there were thousands that were
Well,
incomplete.
I think and the New Georgia project, that was in 2014.
Yeah.
So that was after this 2012 thing. I think, my thing is, what I saw is I think Secretary Kemp got a bad rap on that because those cards were being dropped off at our office, and a lot of them we were having to send out to the other counties because and
They didn't
I
belong
think the
in
New
Fulton.
Georgia project, their motives were genuine. They wanted to go out and hire somebody, but what they did, from what I understand, is they hired some kind of contractor to go out and register people.
And they were getting paid by the registration, and
And-
that's where.
And we were getting applications that they didn't have the street number, they wouldn't have the street name, they were missing parts of the name, missing date of birth, they wouldn't be signed.
But certainly it wasn't all 50,000 that weren't
No,
processed.
but we processed. We ended up, our county, I think we ended up receiving somewhere around 35,000. We were unable to process about 2,000 of those because they were just, and some of them were illegible. It just came down to we didn't know what to do with them. We couldn't even, the ones where we could figure out, and it took a lot of labor for us to process these paper applications. And so, I thought the coverage was unfair to Secretary Kemp in regard to the New Georgia project because of what I saw that we were dealing with in my office. And I'm all for the groups going out and registering people to vote. We just what we told New Georgia project this time, and that when we told there are two other groups, just get us complete applications. If they're complete, then we can process them.
And there, you also were handicapped by the rule that you weren't allowed to process new registration for 90 days before the election or something like that, or in
Yeah.
between, because of whether you knew someone was allowed to vote or not in that election if they'd passed the date.
Well, and that
Right.
hampered them, I'm sure, in
And
2012.
this just got changed the other day, the law, right? Or the directive on that.
Correct.
Tell me about that.
Well, the Secretary of State's office is saying now that we don't have that 90-day blackout period. We still, as Fulton County, we're going to process everything up, that's eligible for the May 24th election. Everybody that registered by April 26th, we'll process those applications. We're going to hold off until after May 24th to process anything else. So we're going to have basically a self-imposed 30-day blackout period for anything that came in, anything that's postmarked April 27th or dated April 27th beyond. There are counties that are going to still recognize the 90-day period. We aren't going to do that. We receive so many applications. We're getting a lot from New Georgia Project, and but their applications that are coming in are good this time. The ones that we're receiving, they're complete.
Well, you've had meetings with
Yeah.
the representatives. That helped a lot.
And I think they're also encouraging people to register online. The online system that the state implemented has been wonderful.
Now, the interesting thing about the whole process is the fellow who was the chief examiner during that 2012 period is Chris Harvey, who's now the state elections director. And I think that's actually helped us because he saw, as I was telling you, the change in the way Fulton County is run now. He sees it firsthand because he saw the entire problem with the 2012, and now he looks at how we're doing. He's happy with it and uses us as a reference point from time to time. So I think it's actually worked out.
So you're not feeling singled out as Fulton County?
Well, I think Rick from time to time gets that way, but feels that way. But I think by comparison, we have a whole nother level of recognition positively than we've ever had before. It's kind of a shame that in some cases, the politicians that are running make such a deal over issues. I get, including this notification problem. I mean, what I get concerned, I would be concerned if there were huge numbers of people that lost the opportunity to vote, period, either regularly or provisionally. And even with this address issue, I didn't see any significant number there. But listening,
I heard a number on the news of 4,000.
Yeah, I mean.
Did you get phone calls in that magnitude?
I don't know how they came up with that number. I mean, I just don't.
I don't know where anybody would have got that.
I just think it's politicians making hay with something that they think they're going to gain some sort of recognition for. I'm sorry, but it's just not there. And if it was there, where is it? Who are these 4,000 people?
Well, I did meet a woman at work who had the exact problem. The precinct was moved, which I brought up at that meeting.
Yeah.
You know, and you know, it's a big inconvenience.
It's an inconvenience,
especially if you don't have a car and you've gone out to vote.
Yeah, it's definitely an inconvenience. But the person, if they got to the place they were supposed to be at, they certainly were given the right to vote.
And the one thing that we have done is we've expanded early voting from 6 locations. Now we have 24.
Yeah.
So we put 4 in each of the 6 commissioner precincts around the county to try to make sure that everyone over 19 days can get out and vote at any of those locations.
Right. You don't need a precinct to go to any early voting location.
You can vote anywhere you want during early voting.
That's part of the confusion, by the way.
Yes, that's what
On
I want to
election
clear
day.
that up. If
Yeah.
you go early voting, you can go anywhere in the county.
And actually, Rick has this idea that it would be great if we could get it legislated, is to make election day voting centers instead of precincts, so that people could go to. Everybody acts the same way whenever they show up in person. Because it's not happening now. Right?
Yeah, and I'd like the legislature to make it so that we can have early voting anywhere instead of government buildings, so that we can put them in grocery stores or malls, or
That would really enhance.
because that's where you
Like
get the foot
ATM
traffic.
machine or
Yeah,
something,
you get the
right.
foot traffic at those places, and that's where the turnout's gonna go up.
the people are already there,
Right.
and they just happen to cross the early voting center.
And one of the stores we were at, they loved when we had early voting because their customer numbers went up 1,000 people per day
Really?
when we had early voting. Yeah, so they loved having us there. And
So
we
it wouldn't
could
be too hard to talk.
So we could sell franchise
Somebody right
rights
here,
to the.
yeah.
Now, another subject I want to get into is the voting rolls themselves.
Right.
And how can you get knocked off the rolls? There's a number of ways. If you didn't vote, say you went to the precinct, you had the wrong one, so you didn't vote, and now are you going to be knocked off the rolls? How many?
It's a long time before that happens. What is it?
Yeah.
There's two general elections. Is
Yeah,
that-
you got to be. It's like 2 general elections, and then
So would that
and
be
then
every
there's a
2 years?
period after that.
So basically 3 years?
You would have to go without before you actually are taken off the rolls and canceled
For
I-
not voting.
for not voting. I think it's like 6 or 7 years.
Yeah.
It's a long time. But basically, we send out these things called no contact, and when those cards come, a lot of those cards will come back. They'll say, no, I'm still living here. They just haven't voted. So at that point, they're not. They're taken out of.
That's an
Not
active. That's an
in-
active. An active. I guess an active event that puts them back in the active voting.
Just for them
Yeah.
to respond,
Right.
they get
Right.
back in
Right.
for
Yeah.
another 6 years.
Right.
Yeah.
If you get an address not returned or
Yeah.
returned with no address,
Then they're out.
Then they're probably going to stay in the hopper, and when they hit that timeline, they're going to go off.
Right.
Yeah. There's no activity, no contact.
Well, and then you have your cross checks. So let's talk about cross-check.
Yeah, and Georgia supplies information for the states that use the cross-check, but Georgia doesn't use the state cross-check. What the ways that you are taken off
You
here.
better explain what
Does that
cross-check
mean,
is.
is that the double state registration thing?
Yeah, is that,
The
you
same
know,
name that you voted here and you voted
Florida.
in Utah or
Yeah.
any of the
Yeah.
states that participate in it.
Yeah, Georgia doesn't
Right?
participate in it. All they do is supply information to the states that request it. So Georgia isn't part of that cross-check program.
But don't you have some kind of check, like whether your name sounds like somebody's name or...
Well, once we do the felon, which there's the corrections department sends a list of names every month to the Secretary of State's office, and then they scrub that against the voter registration list, and there's, I think, 6 categories.
Yeah.
And those people then are removed monthly, and it can be anywhere from 200 to 400.
But they're only
500 names.
removed after they've been mailed a letter indicating that we're about to remove them and they're welcome to come to a hearing with evidence.
to contest whether they
Right.
are in
They
fact
can either mail in the
convicted.
information or present it at a hearing live and be maintained on the voter registration list if our information is incorrect.
Yeah, and if somebody doesn't vote too, we do try to make contact with people with confirmation notices or no
Yeah.
contact letters before they go in from inactive to canceled. So there is an effort put out there but what we try to do is just make sure that we have active voters in our rolls, as many active voters as possible. Right now we have just over 698,000 registered voters, which I think is the most ever.
Yeah, I think that is.
And we have about 520,000 of those are active. There's about
And
100
400 a month are becoming convicted felons.
That's about right. It ranges.
Because I mean, that was the number when I was at the meeting last time.
I think it's as low as 250 and as high as a little over 400.
That's
but
a huge percentage of the voters that are getting convicted.
Yeah, it can be 200 to 400 and then there's
Of course, when a person fulfills his obligation under his previous felony conviction, then he gets his rights reinstated, or he can re-register.
Yeah, but they have to re-register.
Right,
but
just like anybody else.
isn't there a period of time that is a grace period after that or is it right when you get out of jail?
As soon as all their obligations are fulfilled, they have a right.
Including probation?
Yeah, I think it does include. Yeah.
So until you're off probation, you can't vote.
Right.
Which seems unfair to me. I mean, in light of the recent, the war on drugs, that the people that started that war on drugs admitting that it was to cut down on the voting.
Well, apparently, Patty, there's 13 states that don't allow it at all. In other words, once you get convicted, you never get to vote again.
Right.
And Virginia is trying to reverse that through the governor's
Terry
actions.
McAuliffe.
But the state law doesn't allow it. So
They have to
Virginia
change the
is a
law,
state
yeah.
that does not allow people to ever vote again, except for if the governor grants a special exemption. But he's supposed to do that apparently by individual, not blanketly like he's done in this executive action. But it surprised me. I mean, I knew we always had the reinstatement process in our law, or have had since I've been involved. But apparently there's 37 states out of the 50 that have a law similar to Georgia where you get reinstated. And there's 13 that don't, including Virginia.
Yeah. Well, I remember Florida in 2000 that, the cross-check that Catherine Harris had, that it was something like 56,000 black men, basically, were taken off the rolls as felons because their name sounded like a felon and their votes didn't count, or they weren't allowed to vote. So in an election that was won by 537 votes, that's,
Right.
I mean, it's something that caught on right away when that, all kinds of states got on that train with the cross-check and everything. And let me just explain to the viewers that cross-check, if your name's similar to a name of someone that voted somewhere else, or
Another state,
a felon, you're taken off the rolls. And if you happen to be Black or Asian or Mexican, Latin, you have an 80% higher chance of having your name sound like someone else, The legacy of slavery, that there's a lot of Washington and Jones, Ralph Jones, who's your registration guy. I'm sure he'd be on the list, right?
I think that's why Georgia doesn't participate in
Yeah.
it, because it doesn't. It's far. That's far
It's
from
difficult to make
foolproof.
up for a good match.
Yeah, I heard the Korean
They can't really
community in
have
Atlanta
hearings.
was up in arms because, they don't have a whole lot of last names
No, they
either.
have very few.
And they were victimized by this pretty heavily. So did you used
but
to
again,
use
Georgia-
cross-check? You
Georgia,
never did.
as like Rick says, Georgia doesn't take people off the rolls using
You
as a result.
notify.
There are people. Yeah, we keep hearing.
We
that,
notify them if they're inactive. We notify them if they're a felon. And then, of course, if they're on a deceased list, nobody to notify. So you just, you get the vital statistics information.
So when you get the felon list, you first cross-check the Social Security numbers?
We review the list.
the state does all that review. Between the Department of Corrections and the state, Secretary of State, they review all that information. It's date of birth, it's
Right.
Social Security number, it's name, first name, last name, middle name. There are just like 5 or 6 categories. So
Date of birth, I think, is in
they
there, yeah.
go through all of them, and then we send out the letter, and we notify them that there's going to be a hearing. And we've had a couple interesting ones here and there, like where there's a twin.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
But
There's a twin.
most of the time, we rarely have. Out of the 200 or 300 that we get every month, we might have 2 or 3 people that will come in, and they will bring paperwork in. Some of it basically says they're still on. It'll say they won't finish their parole for 3-4 more months or something. They think they've satisfied it, but then they have to wait. We've had a couple instances where one person has fulfilled it, but month after month after month,
showing up.
the board has had to, take the name off of the list.
Yeah.
So
ID. You vote in Georgia, you need ID. And what kind of ID do you need? And is this a problem for some people?
we need you need either the driver's license, tribal ID, passport, any type of government ID.
Right.
That's
picture
basically-
ID.
Yeah, it's a picture ID that is issued by the government. It can be military.
So if I was like a little old lady who didn't drive and I didn't have that,
Can go to our office. You can go either, or you.
oh,
can
you
go,
will issue ID?
We will issue ID only for voting. It's just a voting ID. We have a way of doing that. You have to bring in, some information to get one of those.
Like what,
identifications.
a bill from your
Yeah,
water department
yeah,
or
and
something
like a birth
that, or-
certificate. and,
Birth
you know,
certificate.
so
Now,
there's like
that's
6.
a big deal.
There-
Even if you've been on the rolls in the past, you have to provide this.
You mean if you're unregistered? Yeah. Well, no. If you just need an ID, you just have to prove that you're that person. I think there are 6 different forms. I don't think you have to bring them all in. It's just you have to prove that you're the person on the in the voter registration rolls, and that that you live there, and then we can produce a picture ID for you that's for voting.
Do you have a problem with that? Like, has it always been necessary to bring a photo ID once you're in the voting rolls?
Well, the law became, Karen Handel was Secretary of State when that law went into effect. So
What year was that?
that's like about
Approximate.
10 years ago. 10?
Mm-hmm.
That's when, and then of course that case was litigated all the way up to the Supreme Court,
Yeah.
along with Indiana,
Mm-hmm.
and it was upheld that it was a valid request. Especially since there's no charge for it. You can get a voter ID or some sort of ID, Georgia ID card, that looks like a driver's license,
Yeah.
and there's no charge for it.
That's important information
Yeah.
for people to know.
Right.
So,
You know, the thing about the voter ID controversy, the politics, I think, are kind of ridiculous because you can't get into a government building, you can't get on an airplane without, picture ID. So why the heck wouldn't you? The most important thing you probably do in life is vote, as opposed to fly in an airplane. So what's the big deal? I mean, I don't understand. Voter suppression is just a bogus argument. It just doesn't happen. And in fact, ever since the voter ID law has been put in
there
effect,
was that woman that just danced with the president, and she was, what, 80 or 90 years old, and she can't vote because she doesn't have an ID. I mean, I don't know. It is a problem for some people, but
So I guess she's never been walked to an office building that required picture ID or.
I think it's
government.
more
You can't get in the
being
Fulton
able to
County-
get.
You can't get in the Fulton County building.
I think it's more a problem of getting a birth certificate. Not everyone can get their birth certificate.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I want to ask now about provisional ballots, because if I go to because to me, I mean, one of the main problems is getting knocked off the rolls, either by a glitch or for whatever reason. Because to me, it used to be different when it was an old paper book and everyone had handwritten, and you knew you were in the book. And now it's just electronic, and it can evaporate just the way electrons do. And if you find that you're not on the roll and you ask for a provisional ballot, is that just a placebo? What happens to it?
Most of them, more than half of them count in Georgia, which is higher than in some other states.
That doesn't sound like it's 100%.
Well, for example, take the Georgia Tech precinct. You have a number of students that voted there that didn't live in, they're not registered voters in Georgia. They're not registered voters in Fulton County. They're registered either in another county in Georgia, they aren't registered at all, or they're registered in another state. So we can't count those because they aren't, we can only count registered voters in Fulton County. Now, if you vote out a precinct in Georgia, your ballot is going to, part of your ballot will count, but only what's in common with your precinct and what's common.
Yeah, wherever you showed up.
Wherever you show up to vote on election day and where you live, whatever commonalities exist, that's the only part of your ballot that's going to count. So
For example, if there was a commissioner, county commissioner, and you were in the wrong county, right? Or you were in the right county, but it was a different House district that you were supposed to vote for. And the one you went to, you're not supposed to vote for. Well, when they review the provisional ballot, if you voted for somebody in a district you didn't belong in, then that's not going to count. Whereas if it was a statewide election on the same day, then it would count no matter where you were in the state.
yeah, in a lot of
So
states.
somebody comes in and votes, and they need a provisional because they're not on the list, and then they walk away, and
We do the research to see if they should, because some people say, I registered to vote through the Department of Public.
Oh, the motor vehicles.
DPS
Yeah.
here. DDS here. So the DDS here, we can check to see if we can check their card, because we can access it electronically to see if they actually checked the box, and if they did, then their ballot will count. And we only have 3 days to research it, so it's crunch time, and we have to go through we went through 2,000 ballots for the March election, but I think more than 50% of them counted. It was mostly, in those heavy student precincts where the college students just think that they can show up and vote wherever they.
It's because they're in school here.
Yeah. But
Well,
what they should do is be requesting
having an absentee from their-
ballots from their home county or state, or
re-register.
Yeah, or if they live somewhere that's away from campus, they need to go to their polling location. 3 of the top 6 provisional places were on college campuses, and the other 3 were at locations that we use as early voting locations, and people think on election day they can go there even though they aren't registered there.
Yeah.
So that's another confusion,
See,
a source of
to
confusion.
comply with the state law, you have to offer people a provisional ballot. You can't just say you can't vote here.
But then once they leave the precinct,
But there
I
should,
mean, you can just go like this with their,
oh no,
right?
Well,
if you
that's
say,
a
well,
matter
they
of
don't live here.
No, because
No.
it'll be out of balance. I mean,
Yeah.
because everything is
They're all
balanced at the end of the
reconciled.
night. The poll workers have to reconcile the number of ballots that they issue, because they're issued a certain number of paper ballots, and they have to reconcile those at the end of the night, in addition to reconciling the electronic ballots. So
Right.
How are they counted, the provisionals? The same way?
the same way, they're just run through an optical scan counter, rather than through media, the media from the DREs, the touchscreens.
So hopefully the people watching the show will get the point that if you're in the wrong precinct and you can get to the right precinct rather conveniently, you should go there because your ballot will be complete.
Now, if I went to the proper precinct and I wasn't on the list, could I demand a real ballot? You would have to adjudicate it right there. I mean, is there any
You'll get a
process?
provisional ballot that'll be complete.
But there's you can't.
Can't vote on the touchscreen.
No.
No.
Yeah.
If you aren't on the registration list, no. So you will get a provisional.
Well, now that we're
ballot.
talking about the touch screen,
Yeah, here we go. This is a whole nother,
yeah.
another can
I
of worms.
mean, we're voting on Diebold machines that were bought in 2002.
Right. By the state. The state bought all the machines.
Now and now they're getting old. I mean, not that they ever worked in the first place. I don't know. You can talk to that. But we all know if you study this that they're extremely hackable, and you would never know. It would be an amateur hack if you could see it. But have you ever found malware on any of these machines, or you don't even investigate them? Kennesaw State does, right?
Well, Kennesaw State is the one that they do the maintenance on them. They also certify them when they come back if they've been repaired. We do logic and accuracy testing on them before every election, and we also, to make sure that they are recording votes as they should. And then, we also have to, we send them out in the field. You can print audit reports on them. I mean, you can actually reproduce every ballot that was cast, if you want. There are audit reports of everything, every action that goes on in those machines.
You mean when you take the little card out, the audit report is in the card? Because it's
yeah,
not
it's
on paper ticker or anything.
No, but it's either stored in the machine or you can get them off the cards. Yeah, but the thing is that, like, I was working for Sequoia Voting Systems back in 2004, and we put the VVPAT, the Verified Voter Printer Audit Trail, on all of those machines, all statewide.
But we don't have that in Georgia.
We don't have that in Georgia.
So that would allow each voter to get a paper representation of what
No,
he
it
voted?
lets
Well,
him
what
have
it
a
did,
receipt
what
later.
it did was the voter voted. The paper was under glass, so that, and before they could cast their ballot, they had to verify that what was on their summary screen was on the paper.
Oh.
And then they'd hit confirm, and then it would roll forward, roll away, so that it was blank for the next one.
Oh, so the paper was retained by the machine.
It's kind of
so
like
paper-
a cash register
Yeah.
thing type.
And the thing is that what Nevada found, the state, was that voters became really irritated with the paper because it took too long for that process.
Oh.
And voters in Nevada especially, they say, look, if somebody we have all these gambling machines here, and nobody can get into them. So why are we, if they can't get into those, nobody's stealing the money. They're going to want the money more than they are these votes. So they just, like Nevadans were.
Come on.
Well, that's like the feedback.
I mean, I can
got.
go on the internet right now and find out how to hack into this machine in 5 minutes.
Yeah, and I think there were some professors that were able to do it, but
Yeah, Princeton.
Princeton
yeah,
University.
but they were also, they had 3 weeks with the source code and the machines and all that.
Well, I mean, once you know how,
But don't you physically have to
Open
access
a-
the machine?
well, there's a door you have to open with the key,
So
but
when you
it
say you
turns
can go-
out it's the same door that is
No,
on,
but,
Yeah, but
I mean,
the-
the
but
same
that's not.
key
But
you
that's
can
not
get.
done online. I mean,
yeah, the
No,
machine.
but I mean, if you went to the place and voted,
yeah,
and you're in the booth,
yeah.
you could use the little key, open up the thing, and that card, if you know how to mess with it, you give it a virus, and at the end of the day, when they put everything together,
But the same
you
thing-
give a virus to the whole system.
yeah.
No, I mean, ask the Princeton guy.
No, I
They'll
read
tell-
this Princeton report. I know what you're talking
But
about.
the thing is, too, is that there's a lot of there's risk in everything. The error rate in hand counting paper ballots is like 5%, and that's huge. That is a high, significant number. So you're
Does
going
it
to
have
there's-
also to do with just the speed? People want to know right away what was the vote. You can find out at 8 p.m. and we already counted the whole thing 5 minutes
Well, I'm
later.
sure that's a major advantage. Is you got the memory cards and they get processed and electronically sent down to the.
But we
the,
have no way to verify it.
center.
No way to go back and say, well, is this true? Because
Well,
there's no paper.
the one thing that we do know is that, I mean, computer scientists can go in and check the audit trails to see if there's some malware in there. The other thing that can happen is you're going to see something in the logic and accuracy tests before.
A mathematician would see it.
Yeah, but these things, and that's why I think one thing I like about Georgia, this whole partnership they have with Kennesaw State, is I think that it's almost like I look at it as an extra layer of security here, because you have like an independent university that is involved in the process. I would personally rather see, I like where a state certifies a number of different types of equipment, the counties purchase their own. I think there is less chance of corrupting an entire state if all the counties have their own systems.
Yeah.
Right, right.
If everyone has the same uniform system, it's much easier to do something.
Yeah.
But-
What are the chances of that? Because
State law says it's got to be uniform, so I don't think it. I doubt they'll get rid of that unless.
how
unless
soon are they going to
Upgrade.
upgrade to another?
When they have more
machine.
money than they
I
need.
I heard Secretary Kemp said that he doesn't want Georgia to be the first one to take on a new voting system. So until some other state does it, I think the plan is right now, from what I've heard, is that we're going to have this system in place through the next presidential in 2020.
Which will
So
be
that's
18
almost
years.
20-year-old machines.
Yeah.
Well, I'm more worried. I guess it's the touchscreens don't worry me as much as the express polls do. They are really slow, and I think we have a higher failure rate in those than we do with the touchscreens.
You're talking about
The
express
express polls are what we
counts the.
No, we
That's-
check in the voters
That's
with
the
the express
registration
polls.
list that's in the computer. There's a
Those
little
will-
computer when you check in after you write out your voter certificate. There's
We look up the
you
voters
got
on those.
you got the voting personnel sitting in front of a little computer and has that precinct's voter register. It replaces the old manual list,
And they're slow, so you get a line and.
and I guess they break down more than
They break. Yeah, we just have issues during the day where they'll fail, and then they're supposed to sync if you have more than one, and We have issues with those. The technology's really old, but the optical scan technology that we have is from the early 90s. I mean, I'm on the media cards that take forever to count. Whether there's one vote or 10,000, it's the same amount of time, and it's like 3 or 4 minutes per card, and they're agonizingly slow.
I can see the stress left over still. Okay, well, I just want to thank you so much for
Yeah, it was
coming
fun.
in and letting us
Welcome.
know all this information.